message is very, very simple. We want to educate the kids, not indoctrinate them.
She doesn't want these projects in her backyard, in Warringah. She wants them in yours.
What's wrong with Australia today?
For me, it's leadership. There's just a lack of leadership.
We should be energy independent here in Australia. We've got everything.
And it's good to see the community come out and really engage in this issue of parental rights.
You only have one vote, but it's very powerful.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you everyone who are watching this, whether you're watching this live or after the fact. If you are watching live on Facebook, YouTube or Rumble, you can contribute to the conversation tonight either through the chat. Please feel welcome to contribute through the chat. It's always good to read your comments and questions. But also, at some point throughout tonight's interview, I will put the link to StreamYard in the description. Please, if you want to call in and have your say, you can just click that link. You can use your phone. You can use your laptop. It's like new age talkback radio. I call it talkback streaming. Same idea. If you want to contribute, click the link and you can come on and have your say or ask a question. But let's kick things off because another big episode tonight with a very important issue. But before we get there, I'm just going to let you know how you can support me and everything that we're doing here at Commanding the Narrative by heading to Buy Me a Coffee. Now, if you do want to contribute, you can head to Buy Me a Coffee and throw us a few dollars. It helps to pay for the StreamYard subscription. We've just launched a new website that did cost some money. And if you also want to give me that warm, fuzzy feeling inside, because it is nice to know that people out there do support us and everything that we're doing. Just like this week, Emma Bowman, who I have had on the show in the past, and she's facing some really big issues out in the Central West Arana Renewable Energy Zone. She bought 10 coffees this week, and Emma's put amazing podcast with real Australian guests. Love your work, Stephen. Thank you. Well, thank you, Emma. Thank you very much for your support. And it does make a big difference and keeps everything rolling here. So thank you very much. And if anyone wants to contribute, you'll find the link in the show notes. The same with our website and anything else that I talk about tonight. Also, another way of supporting us is also by maybe getting some merchandise, ex-candidates or Commanding the Narrative merchandise. You just head to xcandidates.t-shirt.net.au, and if you've been watching this show, you've seen us wearing some of those t-shirts recently. And lastly, the website. So the new website is up and running. Check it out. If you want to keep up to date with all our podcasts, maybe some articles that I've written for The Spectator or elsewhere, you can find them all on commandingthenarrative.com. It's a very easy one to remember. Just remember commandingthenarrative.com. And if you want to, you can click the link up the top, which says sign up, and you'll get a weekly newsletter with all podcasts from that week, or any articles that I might write, or maybe some events that we're planning to do. It's a good way for you to stay up to date with everything that we're doing. So it's a really easy way. A lot of people say that with following us on Facebook or other social media, they don't see our stuff pop up all the time. Well, this is a good way of you to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. So just remember commandingthenarrative.com, hit the sign up link, and away you go. Now, we have talked about offshore wind farms and the projects that has been proposed down in the Illawarra on the ex-candidates with Ben Britton, but I'm going to talk about it again tonight because it is a massive issue. It's a big issue where you have the government and climate groups spreading a lot of, I would say, misinformation and disinformation. I know they're targeting the general population with that sort of talk, but the government does just as much as anyone else, probably more. And there's a lot of information going out about this offshore wind farm project in the Illawarra, and the community is pushing back. And we have one person who is part of that pushback tonight. His name is Alex O'Brien. I'm going to bring him on right now. Alex, welcome to Commanding the Narrative.
Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
It's a pleasure, mate. It's a pleasure to know that there's good people out there that are standing up for their communities and pushing back against the government and the projects that they're proposing. I know it's just a proposal at this stage, but it is quite significant, this project. How did you get involved in the activism of pushing back against this?
Yeah, look, like many people, I heard a little bit about it, in the paper and on the news. And, initially my thought was this is a great thing, in terms of, I had concerns about the impact that mankind had on the environment. And, I thought, why not switch to renewable energies? But the more I began to learn about it, and then I heard about a rally down at Flagstaff. And that was really the first big insight for me to, really delve a bit further into this energy source and this project. And after many years of being off social media, I rejoined to learn more about what the government wasn't telling the community. And I was really shocked. And, from there, I pestered a few of the admins on some of the social media groups to get involved. And, to help out, where I could. And, it's definitely been a journey, Stephen, and I've definitely learned a lot more about offshore wind and government processes and politics and how media works through this. But, I think that'll just make us stronger in this fight.
What were your initial concerns about this project, and where are you at now? I think you said to me that the more you learn about this, the more skeletons you find in the closet.
Yeah.
Where are you at personally before we start even talking about the project?
Yeah, look, I'll make it very clear, personally, I'm not against, the move to renewables. What I am against is renewables at any cost. And that is what this project is. So, for me, a lot of the narratives that were told by the government about it being for, saving, the steel industry or for, the climate crisis, when you dig further, it's there really to benefit, billionaires and big business. And to try and create, a big export industry in hydrogen. That's my personal view. And for me as well, similar generation, Stephen, we were just talking about, our young ones before, but having worked in wealth management and helping a range of people build wealth tax effectively, I'm very well aware that we've got an ageing population in this country and a reduced tax base, which means we're going to share more of that tax burden moving forward. And when you look at the cost of living crisis at the moment, mortgages are high, cost of living is high, with food, childcare, and just general living. And to kind of whack on these projects, which are very expensive, and it's one of many. I'm thinking about the future for myself and for, my daughter. How are they going to be able to afford this? If we're just going to, what I personally think is destroy the economy by chasing something that we haven't really thought out properly.
It's a good point, because the talk at the moment is all about inflation, and they're targeting homeowners and consumers with that. But at the end of the day, it's really government spending that is driving inflation, in my view. I mean, we saw a huge amount of government spending during COVID. That seems to be forgotten about. Now there's increased spending and a continuation of spending with these renewable projects. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars. There's even an estimation of trillions of dollars when it comes to the high voltage transmission lines that they're going to have to build for all these projects, whether it be offshore wind or wind projects out in the middle of the country, or solar projects or whatever. So there's a lot of money to be spent, and that will contribute to inflation and higher interest rates and a whole bunch of complications that are going to come from it. So it is quite significant. I know the climate alarmists out there will say, well, we have to do something. Doing nothing is worse than doing something. So that's their argument. How do you feel about that?
And look, Stephen, it's no different to, the emotions that I see in the investment world and, dealing with clients, no matter how wealthy they are, when things look like the world is going to end and when they've been fed that narrative consistently, they become irrational. and they think that the world's going to collapse tomorrow. Now, it's no different if you look at the GFC. You know, it was a pretty disastrous situation, but we got through it. If you look at the geopolitical issues we've had around the world, you know, the Russia-Ukraine situation, you know, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and now even with, you know, the pandemic, you know, we see irrationality come into markets where people think, you know, the world's going to end, but we do move past it. So, and it's no different, you know, to some of the behaviours that we saw during the pandemic. And I always bring it back, you know, to my client conversations about the madness about toilet paper. You know, everyone was rushing out to get toilet paper because they thought it was going to disappear. And there is an element in our society at the moment, and, you know, where they're fearing that, you know, the world's going to end tomorrow if we don't act, you know, quickly. But we shouldn't move at a pace and we put all reason out the window. You know, we can have a sensible, mature discussion, and it may, you know, require us taking a little bit more time. But if we can get it right, it's good for, you know, communities, it's good for our environment, and, you know, for our economy. And, we, you know, when we see some of these figures of $1.5 trillion is going to be needed by 2030 and then 9 trillion by 2050. These are big numbers, you know, and again, I like breaking it down when I'm talking to my clients. So I break it down, 1.5 trillion on our tax base, which is about 13 million Australians, is about $115,000 of, you know, tax. Now, I'm not saying we're going to necessarily pay all that in tax, but some of that's going to come from developers, and some of that's going to also come through, you know, the higher cost of goods. As well, long term, because energy feeds everything. You know, it's your local takeaway shop, it's your supermarket, it's our transportation system. So everything increases under that. And I think to go down that path without a proper plan in place, you know, is, you know, it's irresponsible. And there's no other way to do it. So I'm attacking it from that point of view. I've paid my fair share of tax. I don't want to waste you know, 30 more years of taxpayer funds on irresponsible government policy.
We can get into that a little bit later, because with all this money that they're spending, I mean, they could be using that money to be spent on other projects that would be beneficial to Australia and be nation building projects. I know a lot of people would probably view offshore wind farms as a nation building project. I would disagree. But what's the sense on the ground in your community? I know you live down in the Illawarra, and it is a vast area. We're talking about Wollongong and Port Kembla and a whole bunch of different places.
Yeah.
What is your sense on the ground? What are people's reactions to this proposed project?
Yeah, and look, when it was proposed in August last year, there was a few rapid fire community sessions. The reaction initially in those sessions was that the panel was ill-equipped. You know, they had a university student in there. They had a First Nations representative who recently it was discovered that she was very anti-offshore wind, you know, a couple of years ago, but has recently received a $300,000 grant from the Labor government. So maybe her opinion's changed on the matter. But it's also, you know, when the questions were put to this panel in the infancy of the proposal, it was clear that they did not understand the project. They did not understand the complexity, and they could not answer the questions. And then for there to be absolute, you know, crickets, or, you know, for 9 months from the government, you know, where they never consulted, you know, with a number of major associations or large stakeholders. It was, you know, really disappointing, you know, especially when Bowen was out there saying he's consulted the community and talked to stakeholders. And so, you know, with the submissions, it was a strong result, you know, 14,000 submissions. More than twice the combined of all, you know, regions across Australia, very strong, you know, position there. And then there's been countless petitions as well that have totaled 23,000. But still, you know, the government says, you know, that the community wants these projects, and the pro crowd as well, you know, says, well, you know, this is not the majority of people. So, you know, it's just ridiculous. And this community is very hurt. Blue Float, one of the proponents, put a submission through as well late last year and then withdrew it. So for many in the community, they actually thought this issue had gone away. They thought it wasn't happening. So it was quite a surprise in June when Bowen came down and announced the zone.
Yeah, that's a common thread that I've picked up on speaking to a whole bunch of people, whether it be people in the Illawarra or, as I mentioned before, people in the central west Arana renewable energy zones, or people even up in Queensland like Katie McCallum and Jib Wilmot. They talk about the lack of community consultation, whereas Chris Bowen and other politicians are running around saying, no, we have consulted with the community and they're on board, or there were a few concerns, but we're pushing ahead. The actual people on the ground living in these places are saying, no, we haven't been consulted. Yep. And if we have been consulted, we've been treated rudely, or we've been dismissed quickly, or something like that. Do you think a lot of people that's their biggest grievance with this whole process, is that the government just doesn't seem to be listening? And then on the flip side, they say that they have been listening.
Yeah, look, I think it goes to the whole approach that the government's taken. They've said this is a great thing. They've said they've consulted the community. They said it will create jobs, it will power homes, but it's just lie upon lie. So yes, the community feels that, after many years of support for the Labor Party, at a local, state and federal level, that times had changed for the better. The community that had supported the Labor Party for so long was going to get some good quality investment. And that seemed to be very promising and, apt for rewarding a community that's been so loyal after so many years. And to throw, a project, which is massive, 300 turbines, on a coastline that the Illawarran residents absolutely adore and cherish, is just really what's upsetting, a lot of people. And so they are feeling quite hurt and let down by the Labor government.
Well, I've done something dangerous. I've put the link in the chat already. So if you are watching on Facebook, YouTube or Rumble, you can click that link. And look, if you're a part of the community down there and you agree with this project, call in and let us know what you think. I mean, we want to hear from all sides about this. So feel free to click that link and have your say. But let's talk about the specifics of the project. Now, this is the website of the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. And this has some, you can see there, it's got the quick facts about this project. As you said, over 14,000 submissions. What's significant is the declared area. It's over 1,000 square kilometers, and as you can see on this this image here, I mean, it's easy to say 1,000 square kilometers, but to put it into perspective, the Singapore, the country of Singapore, it's its own country, is 735 square kilometers. The city of New York is 790 square kilometers. This is going to be 1,022 square kilometers with 300 turbines. I don't think people really understand the scale of this.
No, they don't. And I think even if you look at, that's again something I have to do for work, is helping people conceptualize something that's not familiar with them. And size is one of these on with this project. And I think it's 1.25 times Canberra. It's the size of the entire Illawarra from Stanwell Park down to Kiama. It's 17 eastern suburbs, 4 northern beaches there, Stephen, your hometown, and 6.25 times our Royal National Park. So it is quite a massive area. And I like the Royal National Park comparison, because it's an environment that's full of wildlife, and so is our ocean. And that's why it's just incredible that they could think that it's okay to put this large project there.
Well, we're speaking about the area, but the height of these are also a significant aspect of it. You've sent through this. This is a comparison of heights of different structures throughout the world. So now you can see there in red at 268 meters is the turbine. You can see Centre Point Tower is not too dissimilar. It's 309 meters. So it's a good comparison. I mean, anyone living in Sydney, whether you've travelled along the M4, heading into the city from out in, Penrith or Parramatta or somewhere, you can always see the Centrepoint Tower. I use the example of Tom Ugley's Bridge down in Sylvania. You can see straight through to Centrepoint Tower. That's about 20 kilometres. So anywhere you are in Sydney, you can see the Centrepoint Tower. These wind turbines are going to be a similar height, and they're going to be right along the coast there. So if you're living anywhere on the Illawarra, and you've made a really good point, if you're living in Sydney as well, if you're living in Cronulla, for example, or even anywhere, Bondi, Maroubra, whatever, there's going to be a big chance you're going to be seeing these off the coast.
And as well, Stephen, they're building them even larger now. So they're building them up to 400 metres. So again, we haven't got any guarantees that that's not going to happen, on the coastline here. And it's just crazy to think how large these are. But, as I've mentioned to you before, Stephen, the visual, it gives people a bit of an idea of the scale of the project, but also starts to raise some questions about just how large these structures are.
So this is a view from Parramatta, which is about 25 kilometres east of the Centrepoint Tower. And you can see it. It's right there.
Yeah.
I mean,
and there'll be 300 of them.
There'll be 300 of them spread out in an area the size of or bigger than New York City.
You've got to remember as well, Stephen, that these are going to have, blades attached to them that are the length of a football field. So, they are going to be massive structures, killing a huge amount of wildlife, bird life. It's just incredible the scale that they're building, but nothing has been built to this scale either. So, it is a massive risk that this government, is taking on. And there's plans to build up to 5,000 of these around the country offshore.
Wow. Yeah, because this is not just an issue for the Illawarra. There's Port Stephens and other areas that these projects either have been proposed or will be proposed. Don't think that this is going to be the end of it.
No.
And I spoke before about the misinformation and disinformation that's coming from the government. If we go back to the website of the department, this is the digital rendering of what the offshore wind farm. This is what the government thinks it's going to look like, right? So we've just seen the image of Centrepoint Tower from Parramatta, which we've looked at is the height of the Centrepoint Tower is comparative to the height of these wind turbines. This is what the government thinks it's going to look. This is from Bulleye Rockpool, and they've done these images for a bunch of different areas. This is Mount Kira, and you can see them off in the background there, very, very faint. I don't see how this is a true representation of these projects. And here's another one from Shell Harbour. How do you feel about seeing these images that the government has put out?
Look, again, it created quite a reaction with the community. So, again, when we're looking at the government saying, and Minister Bowen came out and said, most days you're not going to see this. So, clearly people know that's an outright lie. And how can they believe anything else that comes out of his mouth? And it's just one lie of many that the government's telling. And, the people can see through it. They're not idiots. They're not gullible. And just because you use a few buzzwords and repeat it a few times doesn't mean, the communities around Australia are going to take that as gospel. We have a fairly intelligent, community, and, you shouldn't discount that by treating us disrespectfully.
You've sent this through as well. This is the website for the Sydney Tower. I always call it the Centrepoint Tower because that's what it was called when I was growing up. You pointed this image out here, which I'll try and make a little bit larger. Now, this is it's not. No, it's not going to work. But this image here, you're saying that in the background there is the Blue Mountains, which is 80 kilometers away, and you can see the Blue Mountains from this image.
Yeah.
So these offshore wind farms, is it 25 kilometers off the coast that they'll be, or
Yes, it'll be about 20 to 30 kilometres, depending on where you are. So it'll be about 26 kilometres off Cronulla, about 35, 38 off Bondi, and Kiama, it'll be 20, 30 kilometres as well. So, but yeah, on Centrepoint's website, they actually say that you can see the Blue Mountains, from the viewing tower. And, there's other literature as well that suggests, 45, 50 kilometres, structures of that size will be visible. So again, going against what Minister Bowen's saying.
Yes. I mean, you can, here's another image. So you want to take the different view here. Now, you're not just focusing on the Illawarra. You're also saying that people in Sydney, specifically in Cronulla, need to focus on this. Now, this is a view from Cronulla Beach, which is going to be facing where this offshore wind project is going to be. As you can see in the coloured section on the water there, you've superimposed the layout of all the.
So that's not even superimposed. That's actually on the government website, so. This is, the great thing with technology these days, and you can play around. So this is using Google Earth, but that is the zone there. And one of the things, again, that the Labor Party, thought they would do is place these offshore wind farms or just all renewable projects in areas where they could afford, public backlash. So obviously the Illawarra being a Labor stranglehold for many years with some good margins, they thought, we can place it there, and the same with, Port Stephens and Newcastle. But what they didn't, consider was just the scale of these projects, but also the fact that when you look at the East Coast, not everything is, a straight line. There's a number of beaches like Cronulla, North Bondi, that are actually looking southeast, and therefore their visual is looking straight on to these wind farms.
Now, what would you say to people that would say, "Oh, who cares if you can see the wind turbines from these beaches?" I mean, we're saving the planet here. We're trying to reduce carbon dioxide. What would you say to those people? Like, what impacts, not just a visual impact, but what does that lead to?
Well, that's it. It draws you into the discussion. It's no different for, a big development like a shopping centre going up near your house. If you can see it or it's nearby, you want to learn a bit more about it. What's going to be, how many levels, what types of shops are going to be there. Are they going to have to clear out, certain properties? Is there going to be an environmental impact? Is it going to impact traffic? And that's no different to this offshore wind project. We want to understand what's the cost of it. What are the taxpayers having to subsidise? What's the impact on the environment? Has this been done before on this scale? And no, it hasn't. So it's not the visual as the main issue, but it's what drags people into the conversation to learn more about the risks of the project.
But the visual is important because obviously people come down to a lot of these beaches, and you've sent me some images of different beaches along the coast. This is it Killee Beach? Yeah. So beautiful beach lines, and I'm sure there's a lot of tourists that come to these places just to see the coastline and everything like that. Do you think that this will impact tourism?
Yeah, look, it will. And the visual side of things does impact our local industry. Now, tourism in the Illawarra and the South Coast sees 12 million tourists annually and brings in $4 billion. The Illawarra alone employs 15,000 people in tourism-related, industries. So it is going to have a huge impact. There's been studies off in the US that has seen a 10 to 15% drop in tourism. So, these are, it's going to have a big impact. Now, if you're talking, $4 billion. Is that a $600 million loss then potentially each year? And does that mean that we're going to lose, over 2,000 jobs, each year? So, when you add up these costs over a period of, 10, 20 years, you're talking $12 billion. So these are not small numbers, but again, it adds to the cost of these projects. And you think about it's, tourism's obviously a big part. And I should mention, Stephen, the Illawarra was an industrial city. It used to be employing 40,000 people, a big component of the Illawarra. But that changed, with competition around the world, with cheap labour overseas. It meant that, companies like BlueScope had to shed workforces, automate and outsource a number of jobs. And they only employ 3,000 people now. So you're talking about, 1% of, less than 1% of the total population of the Illawarra is employed in direct steel jobs. So, for Bowen again to go and say this is an industrial city, it used to be, and the Illawarra is proud of that industrial past, but it had to reinvent itself for the sake of its economy, and tourism was a big part of that way forward. And having lived down here, I can tell you there are still places that I haven't been to that just simply amaze me. And I love taking different family members and friends down to different spots, but it is just such an incredible place. And lastly, I should say as well, my wife and I were fortunate to have taken a year and a half off and, traveled to some incredible places. And, there's only a few places quite like the Illawarra and South Coast. With that escarpment, with the, 30-odd beaches, the mighty, Lake Illawarra, it is just, phenomenal, in terms of what we have to offer. And, tourism is only continuing to grow here. We've got another 1 million people moving into Southwest Sydney. We've got, the Western Sydney Airport, which will have a flow-on impact as well if they do build, the rail. And you've got potentially an upgrade with Shell Harbour Airport and 7 new hotels going in. I don't know if you've been to Shell Cove, Stephen, but it is well worth having a look to see just how incredible that area is. And it's, a tourism hotspot now.
The other thing you need to take into consideration, you mentioned wildlife before, and a lot of people have discussed whale migration and the impacts that these projects will have on whale migration. What are your feelings of the environmental impact in regards to wildlife?
Well, look, and again, you just have to go to Blue Float, which is a Spanish-based company that put their submission in early, way before, even the zone was actually announced, which was a bit of a mistake for them, which caused, a few angry messages, I'm sure, from Bowen and the Labor Party. But in their submission, they identified between 80 to 100 endangered species in the zone. So it's just quite incredible, to think that they could put, something of that scale and endanger so many different species, but also all the, the other marine life that migrates there. This year, Stephen, it also, so we're quite in regular contact with people in the US who are also fighting these projects there. And what they have noticed is a significant increase in whale mortality. Now, again, there hasn't been, any kind of comprehensive, study at the moment, to confirm what they're seeing, but they're very concerned. And, when you see like reports like the one that you just shared, which is a incidental harassment authorization, which actually allows these offshore wind developers to harass marine life. And when you see some of the numbers now, just keep in mind, this is from a government website. This is their authorization to a wind farm developer. The numbers are quite concerning. And, again, it kind of goes against this narrative that there's no impact on marine life. And, you're talking about, 4,700 common dolphins, which will be, the developer is allowed to harass. Now, again, there's different ways to look at this. Some people in the industry suggest that, the harassment's also, causing, severe harm and potentially mortality. But, the way they have actually, looked at it is, from a government point of view is at the moment is they're saying it's harassment. But it's concerning to see this unusual mortality event happening off the East Coast, which groups on the ground, again, in the US are saying that this has been happening around the time that they've started these offshore wind projects there. So they're a bit further along, but it is very concerning, what we're seeing. And the other thing in terms of, so it's, North Right Atlantic whales, very endangered. There's only 300 of them left, and that Blue Point developer is allowed to harass 14 of them. That's a massive number, and just goes against everything. Those true environmentalists out there would just look at that and say, that's not okay. And that's why you've got people, like Paul Watson, who are regularly posting things, about offshore wind and his concerns. Now, Paul Watson, for everyone, he was the original, he was actually one of the founders, I believe, for Greenpeace in the 1970s. He then set up Sea Shepherd in 1972 and, continued to lead that. And he was very active in terms of putting pressure on Japanese whalers, to protect endangered whales. And he was kicked out of his organisation a couple of years ago because, I think it got a bit too corporatized, and it kind of moved away from what it was. But he set up his own foundation now. Just you kind of, and I know, Bob Brown's had some concerns as well about, the Robbins Islands, wind farm. And again, even though, for a guy who understands, environmental concerns and has actually, protested against renewable projects before, the Franklin Dam was one of them. He's got a history of also saying, renewables, yes, but not at any cost. So again, we really need to kind of think about this. And I think you had a question there, Stephen, about the impact on fisheries.
Yes,
that's a massive. So, Mark Horn, down at Kiama, one of the best lobster fishermen in our area has, been on a number of different media outlets like Ben Fordham and has continually, suggested that Chris Bowen comes on his boat, to see the wildlife he sees in these zones. And, even when you talk to people like Better Choice Fisheries, which are, two organisations that have got a certification for sustainable fisheries and have decades of experience in terms of tracking marine life and fishing populations, they said it's going to be devastating, in terms of the impact. Now, also on that, where the zone is right on, these main fishing spots. And a lot of that fish actually goes to the Sydney fish markets. So the Sydney fish markets actually put a submission raising significant concerns about the Illawarra offshore wind farm and the one up at Port Stephens and Hunter, basically saying if, we go down this path, we're potentially risking supplying Sydney fish markets with local fish. So, there's huge concerns there as well about the impact there. There's, obviously, a number of impacts as well on, bird life as well, and, endangered albatross and petrels and sooty oyster catchers. So, this is not something that is necessarily going to be without impacts. And again, just because it's a green energy doesn't mean it can just be put anywhere. You need to still be sensible in your locations. I'm a big believer that we're smart enough, as a species to work out more appropriate projects and potentially looking at already degraded sites, and not ripping up, forests or oceans.
Well, there's a lot to consider because I think a lot of people would just be under the assumption that once this is built, that's it, and you don't need to really do too much more. But that's not the case. We know with wind turbines, they only really have a lifespan of say 20 years. So there's going to be continual construction going on. The initial installation, the maintenance of it, the uptake of it. 20 years can go by pretty quickly, and then you're going to have to either tear these things down or replace them. I mean, even stuff like this happens. I don't know where this actually took place. This is an example of an offshore wind farm somewhere in the world that's caught fire. Now we know that there's oil in the turbines that would be spewing out into the ocean. Once this all the debris from the fire will be going into the ocean. I've seen fires from turbines on land where the turbine has actually fallen off and crashed down, and you can see debris falling at the moment into the ocean. What impact is that going to have on the ocean itself and also the marine life? We're going to be putting 300 of these things out there.
Yeah. And look, to kind of think about the impacts is just going to be devastating. And, there's so much about our ocean ecosystem that, we're still discovering and learning. And, I've certainly learned a lot, through this process. And, the importance of sponges and, the importance of our seabed as well to, healthy ecosystems. Even recently the CSIRO, sent out a survey ship and it's discovered even more about, these trenches where there's another highway for marine life to travel through. So to think that we're going to put, again, the 300 massive turbines the size of Centrepoint Tower with huge spinning blades, you have to think about how do you actually hold that down? And so you need 3 to 4 400-ton anchors. Now, again, I believe that's either 1 or 2 blue whales, in terms of comparison to hold these massive structures down. And then you're going to need kilometres of cables. So, again, you're talking about maybe 1,200, 400-ton anchors, to weigh these down. And again,
I was gonna ask this because I think, I mean, again, this is something I don't think people are really going to take into consideration. Now, these are going to be floating, right?
Yes.
They're not going to pile these into the ocean bed. They're going to be floating. You're saying they're going to be held down by anchors. And then there will have to be transmission lines going to each one of these turbines, 300. I can just imagine that would be a spaghetti mess under the ocean. Are they run along the ocean floor, or are they just dangling in the middle of the water?
Yeah. So, and again, these are really good questions, and these, will kind of connect to the seabed floor. And that's where the concerns of like lobster fishermen in terms of the impact on lobster eggs and the mutations that happen. And it causes a lot of disformity. In fact, the Victorian, Southern project, which got reduced by 80%, was because of the concerns of this impact, on lobster fisheries. And it's something there is growing evidence. Further to that, when you look at the kilometres of cables, it becomes almost a labyrinth. And the problem with, again, humankind's, activities, we've, thrown a lot of stuff in our oceans, discarded fishing nets, plastic. So what happens is that they actually latch on to these cables. And it's called a secondary entanglement risk. So it's not necessarily entanglement for large migratory species like whales. It's the secondary entanglement that comes from, the discarded nets that latch on. So it almost becomes like a growing spider web over time that just will catch more and more wildlife. Now, interestingly as well, in Portugal, Blue Float, which is one of the proponents for the Illawarra and also Port Stephens and the Hunter, or was, but maybe resubmitting their application. They have their CEO, Carlos Martin Revals, actually oversaw a project with, I believe, EDF Renewables, 3 turbines, much smaller. And the fishermen have said that the fish have disappeared around a mile of these 3 turbines. Now, what has also happened is 15 fishing associations representing 450 individual fisheries have now come together to fight the government on any more offshore wind projects along the Portugal coast. They're worried that it will create an ocean desert because of the impact of these turbines.
What happens in a storm? I mean, that's something that springs to my mind. Like you have a big storm and there's a big swell. I know you said that they're floating and you could just imagine them bobbing along with big waves coming in.
Well, you
What
can
happens there?
imagine. You can imagine what actually that does in terms of that movement. Potentially creating more disturbance to the currents underwater. Disturbing more wildlife, but also putting pressures on those structures where there's likely to be breakages. As well, and it may be breakages in the cabling or the transmission lines, which then just kind of floats around. Creating a rubbish tip on the seabed.
Now, we've been talking about the environmental impact. I think the next thing we're going to be talking about might seem trivial in regard to the environmental impact, but there's also an impact on yachting. Everyone knows about the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. Some people are saying that it might need to be renamed the Sydney to Hobart obstacle race because the route that the yachts go through, you can see it on this image here. You can see all those different colored lines. They're individual routes that the yachts have taken in one of the in the yacht races, and it goes straight through this area that they're proposing for the offshore wind project. So, do you think when Chris Bowen goes out there and he says that he's consulted the community, do you think he's consulted yacht clubs?
I don't think so, but it'd be interesting to see what their reaction is to that. And look, what it highlights is marine traffic. Again, something not everyone is familiar with, but if you think about our defence force, our defence force will take the quickest route if there is a threat to the country or they have an exercise. They very well likely have been taking that exact route through this offshore wind project. Now, if the government is going to plan on building this in Port Stephens, Hunter, and also down at Ulladulla and Eden, these are major obstacles for our defence force. There's concerns as well about the impact on their sonar, the impact on their speed in terms of being able to come back, and any potential disturbances, as well to their ability to act swiftly. So, it raises concerns. It also, highlights significant concerns about the pressure it's going to have on moving, existing marine traffic, like cargo ships around the wind farm zone. Again, it's a massive area, and therefore it's going to increase the traffic in, highly sensitive areas. Now, interestingly, the Illawarra has a very highly sensitive marine ecosystem. This has been documented in many of the submissions by the environmental experts. And so if you put more pressure on cargo ships coming through in a narrower area, that's potentially going to devastate more of the, the marine ecosystem. As well, and it increases risks of spills and the like. And, there's plans potentially to look at shipping, hydrogen or liquefied hydrogen ammonia, which is incredibly toxic. A bit like that can that you've got on the shelf there. It's often the ingredient, or the chemical, I should say, that's kept on the very top shelf in a science lab because of how toxic it is. Now, again, the reason ammonia is important is because a number of renewable projects, wind farms, offshore, onshore, and also solar farms are going to be producing hydrogen, or that's the plan. There's about 100 hydrogen hubs planned around this country, which Minister Bowen boasted was about 40% of the entire global total. So there's a big bet on hydrogen. Now, hydrogen, is being considered as the new oil, and even Fortescue, has indicated that they want to be the new, Saudi oil baron, because, there's a massive rush now around the world where I believe Morocco has even earmarked, a million acres or hectares towards green hydrogen production. But coming back to the hydrogen side, it will be liquefied into ammonia, which will then be used to transport around the world and create an export industry. Every time Minister Bowen talks about, being a renewable superpower, or Twiggy says the same, that's what it's about. It's about exporting hydrogen and rushing to be a large-scale hydrogen producer. But I just don't see it being a race that we can necessarily win, Stephen. You look at what China's already developing. You look at $800 billion that the Inflation Act in the US is committing to these projects. And you look at Europe as well, committing huge amounts of money. Are we squandering and fast-tracking these projects in a race we cannot win? And I think there's a lot of people that are starting to talk about this. It's very concerning.
Well, you mentioned the Defence Force and the Navy. When we had Ben Britton on, he was talking about these nuclear submarines that we're going to have here in Australia. They're going to need a port somewhere, and a good option would be Port Kembla, and that's going to bring a lot of investment to the area, a lot of jobs and money and all sorts of different things. Well, if you're going to have an offshore wind project off the coast that's the size of 1,000 square kilometers, you're not going to be able to put any ports there.
No, exactly. So, and look, it causes, a number of issues, again, just from a military maneuver point of view, and there's the impact on sonar as well. So, again, it seems like the government's not going to reveal where that base will be until after the election. But, I think touching on the hypocrisy there, where they're okay with nuclear subs but not okay with nuclear energy, is, just another crazy thing, which people are waking up to and, just not trusting what they're saying. But also, you talk about, climate crisis, and then they start, going on about all the, the potential impacts of nuclear. It's just crazy in terms of the way that, they're narrating this conversation, and people are poking holes in the argument, and it's not taking a lot now, to see that, they're on a path that has not been well thought out, and they're not open to admitting that maybe they've got this wrong, or maybe they just need to slow it down.
Speaking of government and politicians, have you had any political support? I know the mayor of the Sutherland Shire Council, who's the Liberal mayor, he came out, he was on Ben Fordham's show, as you were at one point as well, speaking about this project. He's pushing back.
Yep.
But do you have any other political support that are getting behind what you're trying to do?
Yeah, look, in the Illawarra specifically, we've had a number of conversations with politicians from a local, state and federal point of view. Again, there's definitely a lot of people, non-Labor, that have been quite supportive there, but also behind the scenes, there are Labor and Greens members that are talking to us privately, saying they disagree, with the party politics on this issue. So you're seeing a bit of, disgruntled members, pushing back and seeing the holes in the argument at the moment. But also, just like Port Stephens, Nationals leader David Littleproud and Senator Ross Cadell came to Port Stephens, but also came down to the Illawarra literally days before Bowen, literally days after Bowen announced, which was, great timing, and basically made a very strong statement that they would scrap the offshore wind project if elected as part of a coalition. So that gave the community, some motivation to keep going as well, and to focus on the federal election. But we're not necessarily saying there's one particular party, but we are happy to support and speak to parties that are aligned with our interests. And Minister Bowen still hasn't talked or reached out to us, and there's a number of associations as well that are supported by 16,000 people, and still Bowen hasn't reached out, which is again I think a big mistake on his part.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a Labor stronghold. It's been a Labor stronghold for a long time. Some people are saying that, with a number of different factors, such as the redistribution and also this project specifically, Labor really needs to start paying attention.
Yeah.
You've been holding, you and different groups down in the Illawarra have been holding events, protests. There was a protest off the at the lighthouse there, which attracted a significant number of people. This is also a community event, a community information event that took place recently, and you can see in there, I've heard reports of 300 people that came to this, which, let me tell you, in politics, if you can get a room of 300 people, that is significant. That is really significant. So you can see that the community is willing to really have some action on this, get involved in this.
Yeah.
How do you think if you had one of these events with 300 people and Chris Bowen walked in to speak to them all, how do you think he would be received?
Well, look, I think the way he's treated the community and disrespected the community and failed to front up the community, I think they'd be quite upset. That's the reality of it. If he came with an open mind and accepted that they made mistakes with the consultation process and that he wants to re-engage with the community, I think there'd be a very different type of approach, and people would be a bit more reasonable. But, you've got to accept that the way it was rolled out was wrong, and they've hurt a lot of people by, attacking people who had genuine concerns, labelling everything as misinformation to discredit a whole raft of research about the risks of this project. And to kind of constantly throw lies out there that this is going to power homes and, it's going to employ, a lot of people, but not consider the negative impacts on local industries, local family-run businesses that employ many people, and, just wreck the coastline. So, it'd have to take a, big apology, I think, from, Bowen, but whether he's capable of accepting that he might have been wrong is another matter. But, if he's a man that's saying that the community want this project, like the pro-win crowd, he shouldn't have any issues coming down and, expecting an embracing community. But the reality is this community is very upset. 65% voted against. And as I said, there's been over 23,000, submissions against, which is a huge number for, a small regional area.
Well, see, that's the problem now. It's become political, so he can't backtrack. So, unfortunately, I mean, what he should be doing is he should be saying, okay, well, there are community concerns. There are active groups out there that are attracting significant numbers of locals that are pushing back against this project. We need to listen to them, and maybe we need to revise, what this project might be. But I know they've come out and they've said that and we're talking about the area of this, 1,000 square kilometers. It was actually going to be bigger originally, and they've scaled it back. So he's using that as an example of community consultation, and maybe
every offshore project to date has been pushed off, and the size has been reduced. So, that was just, an outright lie. Again, he has not consulted any of the communities. He's not talked to, again, Mark Horn, who runs a very successful lobster fishery. He has not spoken to many tourism operators that we have. So, it's just part of their strategy was to make it seem like they've consulted and considered, the community and the stakeholders and reduce the size. But there's been no environmental study undertaken. So, what we were calling from throughout this process was to re-engage the community, undertake independent environmental impact studies first before a zone is declared. That's a pretty common sense approach, I would think. But the minister has not done that.
I think about the money that's going to be spent on these projects and the other things we could be doing, nation building projects that we could be doing with this sort of money. Like, I would love to see a high-speed rail system in Australia, or maybe build some more dams or something like that. In terms of the Illawarra itself, is the community screaming for infrastructure down there? Are there roads and rail that could be built that is drastically needed, maybe compared to this project?
Look, definitely. And I think that comes to the whole issue is that the government seems to focus these big spending projects, which benefit, again, big business and billionaires. And just to put it into scale, to create about 2 gigawatts, which is 2/3 of this region, it's about $10 billion, according to OceanX. So potentially for three gigawatts, it's going to be about 15 billion, potentially more than that. And that's excluding a lot of the transmission lines, potential storage, hydrogen production, the road, changes as well that will need to happen. There's also going to be changes to the ports as well, to allow these huge machines to be able to assemble, these offshore wind projects. And then, as you pointed, Stephen, it's also, what about the cost of replacing these after 20 years? Now, interestingly, Equinor have a high wind project in Scotland, a total of 11 turbines. After 6 years, they have come in for heavy maintenance. And they didn't even have that maintenance completed in Scotland. So the promise of jobs locally was another lie, and they shipped them back to Norway, and they've been offline for months now. So again, there's concerns there that, we're going to build 300 turbines here and potentially, have to look at replacing them after 7. So again, there's big spending money. Now, further to that, our local member, Alison Burns, despite, Bowen going out saying it's going to generate enough energy for 3 million homes, now 2 million, she said 2/3 of the energy will go to BlueScope. Now, BlueScope's nowhere near ready for, using hydrogen to produce green steel. There's no steel producer anywhere near that type of production around the world. And, when you look at it, the market cap of BlueScope's $10 billion. So are we going to spend $10 billion for an energy system for one company? That'd be like spending, $1.5 million on an energy system for a $1.5 million home in Sydney. It's just outrageous to spend that amount of money on an energy system. And we really need to look at the hard to abate industries like steel, which is not a problem just for Australia, it's a problem around the world. And again, BlueScope's not even top 50, steel producers in the world. And Austria, I believe, produces more steel than Australia, and it's 1% the size of our country. So again, a bit of common sense needs to come into the discussion when looking at the cost for these projects. But coming back to your original question was, why aren't we spending more at the consumer level? There's been a huge take up of rooftop solar in this country. There's a number of groups that, very much want to look at more of that. And you would say, I personally believe the majority of the Illawarra would be, very much looking to take that up. And again, there's issues with that, don't get me wrong, but why isn't the government looking at the consumer first, especially in the cost of living crisis with energy prices where they are? But also, we know that some of the larger emitting areas are transportation. So why aren't we investing in the fast rail, like what's been promised to the Illawarra time and time again, cutting that commute time by 30 minutes and taking potentially 20,000 cars off the road? Why aren't we investing in terms of, more buses, and there's also a proposal at the moment, maybe look at light rail, in the Wollongong CBD. So there's also the agricultural sector, and it's not just, there's a bit of that still left in the Illawarra, but around our country where a lot of these projects are going, there's a huge investment that could be done with our rural communities to reduce emissions from animals, and providing, adjustments to their feed. And, there's been some incredible developments there, and, to better manage those properties, from an efficiency point of view. Why isn't the government spending near enough on those higher emitting areas? And we've also got to look again, as consumers, we consume a huge amount. So do we need to maybe rethink the way we, spend on the latest iPhone, which requires huge amounts of energy? And maybe, why is the government also, clearing out huge amounts of land for more housing and allowing 1 million migrants into this country, which are just going to require more energy? Like, it just, everywhere you look, it just doesn't make sense. And it's not for climate change. these big spending projects. That's clear. If it was, there'd be a much more considered approach to the renewable or the energy rollout, and it's just not a rational one at the moment.
Yeah, but look, the government tries to act like they're the experts on everything, and they've got all these organizations behind them that do all these reports and everything like that. But look, a lot of the time you just have to speak to the community, and if enough good community heads can get together, they often can come up with the best solution. And they should be consulting more with the community and going to these events that you and others are putting on to get the best answer. I'm sure, as you said before, like the minds in this country could come up with a solution. Yeah. We don't have to go down this path. So, look, mate, you've been fantastic tonight. I don't know how you cram all this information in your head. It's a lot of good stuff. You've obviously been across this issue for a while now. What's your final message to people? I know the Illawarra is probably well aware of what's happening here, but you want to focus on Cronulla and Sydney and other areas, but also people listening to this in other parts of Australia, and maybe some parts of Australia like Port Stephens or down in Victoria, where they're going to be facing these offshore wind projects as well. What would you like to say to them?
Yeah, look, I think this is, not an issue that's just one area. It's an issue that impacts this entire country. If we don't, basically stop the Labor government and, the Greens, it's going to destroy this country and everything that makes Australia great. Our coastlines, our regional rural communities are being destroyed by these projects, are being divided, and it's being driven to create profits for big business and billionaires, and we've got to put a stop to it. I'm doing this, really for my daughter because, I want her to, grow up in a country that, she can appreciate, and she can see that there are intelligent people that can come up with better options that communities are part of, that discussion. So we need to just come together and fight this issue. And, I do believe that the more we talk about this issue and the more we educate, our family, friends, the more we contact our local politicians. As you said, when you get 300 to these events, and we've had 1,000 at 3 so far, that has ripple effects. So, you'd be amazed, the one conversation you have, the connection that it could make, could have, a monumental ripple effect. And that's why we just have to keep pushing forward with this.
Yes, definitely. Well said, mate. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I mean, I guess the main message for people out there is to get active. Don't sit on your hands. I mean, you'd be surprised at how much you can achieve just by stepping in the arena and being active. And if there's a local community group in your area that are pushing back and you agree with them and you're like-minded with them, get involved, support them, do whatever you can to get involved. And look, thank you, Alex, for coming on tonight, and thank you for everything that you're doing down in the Illawarra. I know you were on Ben Fordham the other day, and you've spoken elsewhere as well. So you're trying to get the message out, but I really need to reach out to the audience watching as well. Please share this information out. If you know people down in the Illawarra, if you know some Labor voters, or you mentioned the Greens, I would throw the Teals in there as well, because they're very problematic. Yeah. I mean, I live in the Teal electorate, so I know all about it. But send this to people that you know who may support these projects. There may be some information in here that Alex presented that may be able to sway people. And look, unfortunately, this has become a political issue. Chris Bowen is not going to back down from this, because it's going to be egg on his face, and that's unfortunately the situation that we live in with the political system here in the country. So the only thing that's going to stop a project like this is a change of government, or at least a big shake-up of the political situation here in Australia. So please share this information out. It's extremely important. And thank you, everyone that have been watching and contributing, and everyone in the chat. We do need to come together and spread this information and do more talks like this and get more of this information out. So thank you, everyone that has watched tonight. Thank you, Alex. We'll see you all next time. See you later.
Thanks, Stephen.